Welcome to the Urban Wine Club podcast. Pour a glass, sit back, and enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Greek Wine Club podcast. I am Ari, and with me is the master of all things wine, Greek wine, any type of wine, my co-host, Fotis Stamos. Hello, Foti.
Yasu Ari.
So we are recording today about basically how the Greek Wine Club came about, why we started it, why we felt we were in a position to start it, and, just basically the history of this podcast and our app and our website. So let me turn it over to you, Fotis, since you are, the wine guy. So I think you are in the best position to kind of lead this conversation on where, why, when, how the Greek Wine Club has happened.
So thank you for that introduction as the master of all things wine, but as the wine guy, you're my Greek drinking wine guy, right? So being in the industry for over 25 years collectively together and so forth, this was bound to happen, even though maybe we weren't thinking like this 20 years ago. But where it all began for us is that, number one, being Greek and Greek American growing up, it was so disappointing that there was very limited and scarce options of Greek wine in the market, whether it be retail, whether it was restaurants. And even back then, the reputation of Greek wines were not that promising or pleasing. I was getting so tired of listening to non-Greeks when they heard that Greece makes wines. And number one, they were like, had no idea. And number two, like, oh, the last time I had Greek wine, it was awful because it was either tasted like pine sol or it was so sweet. And I just couldn't accept that. And I was determined back then to make a difference by getting involved, learning more about Greek wine, connecting with people in Greece who were producers, farmers, and so forth, and kind of wanted to get their perspective first and why this is the case. Why isn't Greek wine a thing in the U.S. when there's so many Greeks throughout the country? So many Greek-owned restaurants dominated the restaurant industry, but yet Greek wines were not a thing. Short story here about the history of Greek wine in the U.S. During the 50s and 60s, where there was huge migration into the U.S. from Greece, because of all these settlers that were coming into the markets, they were also bringing with them their ethnic products, and they were able to bring wine of that time to the U.S., but it was just being consumed by that generation of Greeks. That's why you had a lot of Retsina in the market. You had a lot of jug wine, a lot of volume wine, and Mavrodaki for the churches. All right? That's it. There was no infrastructure back then anyways. So as time went on, and as we mentioned, we got, intrigued and wanted to find out why this is the case that Greek wines don't have a place in the U.S. market. We started to do a little bit of legwork. And as we were learning more, as our journey began in the Greek wine industry, we found out there were actually individuals in the industry that wanted to produce better wine, and they were determined to make better wine. And because of that, we wanted to be there at the forefront when this started to happen. So, we were actually at the time, in a small operation of bringing wine to the market, and we were pounding the pavement door to door, going to retail shops, asking them, can we showcase some of the Greek wines that we bring to the market? And for the most part, we got a lot of doors closed in our faces. We got a lot of people laughing at us.
So people in the know and people in the industry did not have any insight or foresight or understanding of Greek wine at that point.
Not at all.
Do you think anybody knew that Greek wine was good, but they just didn't think they could make money, so they closed the door? Or do you think they just don't know about Greek wine at that point?
Good question. I have to say that I can understand why, because if I was in their shoes and I wasn't familiar, to your point, I wouldn't want to invest in inventory of wine that was just going to sit around, right?
Yeah.
Let's be honest. But we were trying to take initiatives where we wanted to partner with retailers and restaurants and say, let us bring our wines from Greece into your store or to your restaurant, and let's work together to do some tastings, open some bottles, get your customers to taste the wine, and hopefully that might actually raise an interest. Maybe somebody might, purchase a bottle because they had a glass, right? So that was a lot of work. The legwork involved back then was intense because it took hours and hours of showcasing wines where you probably got out of a day's worth of tasting, maybe someone to buy a bottle, right?
Yeah.
But we still felt that one bottle at a time was good enough to make this new impact. So at the same token, this is during the late 90s, early 2000s, the EU was implementing some interest in Greece's wine industry. They created some infrastructure on regulating the quality of Greek wine, just like the French do. And that was really the starting point for Greece getting serious about winemaking and not just making bulk wine and selling it cheaply, right? So when we saw that happening, that's where we got excited that this is it. This is the moment. We have to get involved on a larger scale. Now, as more travelers were visiting Greece, non-Greeks, and having better experiences and then trying better wine in Greece, and they were coming back looking for it, that was an indicator at that moment that the trend is beginning. I don't say a trend, but let's just say an interest, right?
Yeah.
But the other side of the coin was that even though the interest was growing, it was the infrastructure and logistics of getting good Greek wine into every market and having it placed on shelves in retail stores, in grocery stores, in restaurants' wine lists. So that was other challenges.
Sorry, let me. I had a thought while you were just getting to that. Do you think, and obviously we can't, you won't be able to answer this with 100% facts because this is theoretical, but do you think if Greece was in a good economy in the 60s, when there was a pretty decent migration in the 60s of Greeks coming over to America, do you think if Greece had a good economy and they put money into promoting their Greek wines with this migration coming into the States, do you think it would have been a different story for Greek wine?
I believe so.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it should.
But, we have to, let's circle back to your theory. And the reality was that, unfortunately, Greece was stricken by different scenarios in their economy, politically, socially. Greece is a very small country. It has, its industries that really the country thrives from is tourism and agriculture.
Yep.
But when you take the landscape of Greece and you break it down, the terrain of Greece is very mountainous and very rocky. So, the amount of fertile land is also limited, right? So the production yields of anything that comes out of Greece is a lot smaller than most European producing areas. So not only were they a small country in producing, small amounts of wine compared to others, they just didn't have the infrastructure. So, but that was changing, a lot of landowners were starting to actually recultivate their land so they can plant vines so that they can grow grapes and then potentially sell off to winemakers. There's a lot of cooperatives that were going on at the moment. And the other part of this renaissance in the 90s was that farmers who owned tons of land with vineyards were sending their children off to universities to study enology.
Yeah.
So that was the next phase of this renaissance, where now you have young, passionate, driven children of farmers who wanted to learn better techniques of producing wine, whether it be France or Italy, and they took that experience and education and they brought it back home.
So they basically had what their parents had, except you add education and practical knowledge of wine and wine making.
Right.
Not just what your granddad told you he was doing in the basement or in the barn. It was a practical application of knowledge on how to create better wine.
Exactly. And most of these farmers were growing grapes that did not know its potential. They had no experience of what that grape can do when it's produced with some talent, skill, and TLC, that the wines could become world-class selections that could compete with other wines around the world. They had no idea that these grapes had that potential until their kids got involved.
So you mentioned Renaissance in the 90s. What time frame do you think was the flip of Greek wine being like, I'm okay, I'm good, I don't need Greek wine, or I don't want to buy Greek wine for my establishment? When was that flip where I gotta get Greek wine now?
Okay.
I have a trendy hot restaurant, it needs Greek wine. Like, when did that kind of time frame occur?
So during this whole preparation, we'll call it preparation, where in the late 90s, the Renaissance begins within, I just mentioned the farmers and their children getting educated, right? So they're building up this new approach because, the timeline to grow grapes and make good wine could take 2 or 3 years, right? Or 4 years or 5 years. There was 2 significant events that came about that really made that flip. Okay. So in 2004, which was just about that time where they were putting out selections of wine that were really class acts, and you had the Olympics coming around the corner, right? The Olympics was probably the biggest PR campaign for the Greek culture abroad, right? So now you had an enormous amount of visitors to Greece, not just to visit because of the summer, but the Olympics included, right?
Yeah.
So that major event happened to actually allow Greece to showcase its treasures, and wine happened to be one of them. Believe it or not, in the same year, the European Cup played a role in the awareness of Greek culture, believe it or not, because the European Cup was being viewed all over the world.
I completely believe it.
And there were so many that were visiting Europe to watch these games. So those 2 major events in 2004, this is my opinion, because statistically looking back and following the industry, after that moment, all of a sudden Greek wine started to take off.
Well, it seems, from your opinion, stating these things, but these 2 events were something that really kicked Greece's reputation up a notch. Obviously, the Olympics being executed very well, and beautiful opening ceremonies, closing ceremonies, just the birthplace of the Olympics, the infrastructure that we built for the Olympics. That said, hey, Greeks, are serious, and they can execute. And the Euro Cup was just another, just like, wow, Greece has something going on. Right. So I completely agree with you with those 2 instances.
And in the restaurant industry in Greece, they were definitely prepared and strapped with having and showcasing at the time Greece's best wines. So every winery was getting actively involved in making sure that they were getting their wines on as many restaurants as possible, because obviously with so many visitors, part of visiting was going out to dine. So that's where the great PR of the wine industry was, that people now were discovering these great wines while going out to dine during that time frame in the summertime during the Olympics. So, that was a huge plus for the awareness of Greek wines, and where most people started coming back from their vacation and their visit looking, where can I get these wines that I just had in Greece, because they were so mesmerized. And because of that, there was also the next round where now those that went to Greece at that time frame were now going back to visit again, whether it was a destination for their honeymoon, or it was because they were so in love with their first visit, they made it a point to go back again. So we look back, and statistically, we saw a huge spike in visitors honeymooning in Greece, specifically Santorini?
Well, I'm going to add to that. I'm going to say this. If we're looking at instances in the recent timeline of what kicked Greece up a notch, I'm going to also add to what you were just saying, and social media must have played a role, because going to Greece and coming back and telling your friends how gorgeous Santorini is like, oh, that's so cool, that's so nice. But having social media and taking pictures in Santorini and Athens and other islands and other beautiful areas, and wine is an atmospheric thing. Like enjoying wine in a beautiful atmosphere like enhances it, right? So now you're taking pictures of sipping a glass of wine on the cliffside of Santorini, and that shows everybody in the world, like, wow, Greece is so amazing.
And if I can add to that, Ari, is that because of the spike in visitors to Santorini because of honeymoons and weddings and so forth, there was a couple of things that really connected with those that were visiting there. Obviously, the number one thing is the sunset, right? And followed by, the beaches aren't the greatest in Santorini if you've been there because of its volcanic landscape. But at the time, because they were actually producing amazing white wine at the time, is people were connecting with Santorini with great white wine. And that was the starting point where Santorini placed Greece on the global map for great wine. So now people were associating great Greek wine from Santorini. And that's where it began. Santorini actually was the door opener to allowing people to understand that Greece actually can make good wine.
So I'm also going to say one more bit of opinion. So Olympics, Euro Cup, social media, and these amazing images of beauty in Greece. I don't think that was what really tipped the scales. I think the invention of Greek Wine Club is what really just tilted everything towards Greece. Prove me wrong.
That, I think, is basically the best theory that became practicality, or it became practical, because, to your point, Ari, Greek Wine Club was created because the buzz was there, the interest was there, but unfortunately, the selections were not easily available depending on where you lived in the United States, right?
Yep.
So the biggest complaint that we get as consumers in the U.S. who enjoyed Greek wine and want to purchase Greek wine is that it was hard to find, hard to get. And if you had any availability in any of your retail shops, the selections were very limited and they aren't always consistent. So that's where you and I had a light bulb moment.
You have a light right above your head, so
I was just listening.
There it is.
Okay. And we put our brains together and said, how can we figure out a way that we can source the wines through our networks and have the ability to build a platform that when somebody is interested in a wine from Greece that they can't find, they'll find it on our platform. And it was going to be as easy as going to our platform, purchasing it, put your information, click a button, and off it goes, and you would receive it in your doorstep within a week.
Beautiful. That's what we thought of. That's what we did. That's what we're doing.
So Greek Wine Club continues to pioneer, I'm going to use that word, in the industry, because besides creating the infrastructure and the ability, we worked diligently and directly with the winemakers. We get involved. We make sure that we get familiar with the wines. We do a lot of wine tasting, by the way. That's
the rough part of the job.
Right. And we want to sell not just the wine, but we're selling the story where the wine comes from. Every single wine that's on that platform from Greek Wine Club has a significant story to tell. And we're very grateful that we have great relationships in Greece with various different winemakers. We're very grateful to have great relationships with the importers that bring the wine to market and the distributors as well. And we're very grateful that we have a growing audience that believes in what we're doing, and also thank us for being able to fulfill this need and create this solution to a problem that's been around forever.
Yeah. Well, I'm thankful for you and the knowledge and the experience that you bring to the table in order to be able to execute a concept like Greek Wine Club. So there you have it, folks. This is what we are, what we're about, why we started this. And, hopefully we can just continue to promote, enhance, and just get Greek wine into everybody's home, every restaurant. Everybody should have and try Greek wine if you haven't. And if you have, just keep trying more, various, whatever it is, just get some Greek wine into your system. You will not regret it.
Absolutely.
So, again, thank you, Foti, for all that knowledge that you bring. Thanks, everybody out there, for watching and listening. And we will see you next time.
Yamas.